Please answer or ask questions along the way. Hopefully this can be more of like a discussion of what you're seeing in the market, what you're afraid of, what questions you have. I'm trying to address some of the questions that I've been getting pretty regularly with just some FAQs from the NAR site. If you have not seen that site, it's this one here, NAR, the facts, NAR settlement FAQs. This thing, it's pretty in depth. So you can go in there and just kind of really find out what's going on, what to expect. But I am going to cover a couple that we're just getting pretty regularly. So, big question is, when is this all starting? A lot of us do know, but October 7th or August 17th is when the changes will go into effect. I haven't heard of this date changing. It was June, now it's August, but that's what we're looking at. So that's when basically everything's going to be start getting enforced. We will see changes from the MLSs no later than August 17th. Now I know if you're a CRMLS user, they have already started making some changes. I'm not 100% sure that was a great idea, but nonetheless, they're doing it. They're the only one that I've really seen make any changes here in California, at least that I've gotten notice on, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So with buyer rep agreements, what provisions are they stating need to be in the buyer rep agreement? And fortunately, you're not going to have to worry about this too much because it is pre-printed and you will need to fill out the sections as you go. So the stuff is already there for us, but the written agreement must include a specific and conspicuous disclosure on the amount or rate of compensation the participant will receive, or how much this amount will be determined to the extent that the participant will receive compensation from any source. The amount of compensation and matter that is objectively ascertainable and not open-ended. So you can't write like, flexible or to be determined in there. It has to be an amount when you're writing up the buyer rep agreement. A term that prohibits the participant from receiving compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the agreement with the buyer. So I don't love this one, but what they're stating there is whatever you have in the buyer rep agreement, let's say you put 10,000 bucks in there, maybe you're putting in a flat fee because that's what the buyers have to work with, and you go to show a property, the seller is happens to be paying a buyer's broker commission, and let's just say it's 2.5%, and maybe that exceeds the 10,000, you're getting 10,000. So yeah, like I said, I don't really love that one, but that's what we're looking at here. So you probably want to put a higher amount in your buyer rep agreement and then adjust later, is what I'm seeing some talking about right now. We're going to get more information about that and best practices, especially as this stuff starts getting implemented. So, and then a statement that broker fees and commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. I don't know how many times it says it in there, but it needs to be in there. Who will be responsible for enforcing the written agreement and ensuring all parties follow new practice change? Actually, it's the MLS. Will be responsible for enforcing the rules regarding written agreements like MLS enforces other existing rules. So that means we're going to have to enforce it. Unfortunately, yes. We need to protect our MLS status. We want to avoid fines. We want to make sure our whole team has MLS access. So we need to follow it just like everybody else. So unfortunately, that's just where we're at with this. Question that came up, can you use the term up to 6%? It needs to be a predetermined amount. So you need to put, it would need to be 6. According to NAR FAQs, what does it mean to be working with a buyer? So we need to be real clear about this, actually. The practice change requiring written agreements with buyers is triggered by 2 conditions. It only applies to MLS participants working with buyers and it is triggered by touring a home. Um, the working with language is intended to distinguish MLS participants who provide brokerage services to a buyer. Providing actual brokerage services to a buyer constitutes working with a buyer. So this means identifying potential properties, arranging for the buyer to tour a property, performing or facilitating negotiations on behalf of the buyer, presenting offers by the buyer, or other services for the buyer. So if you're doing any of those things, you are what they call or will deem working with the buyer. Under the proposed settlement, just marketing services to a buyer or just talking to a buyer on a seller's behalf, for instance, at an open house or showing a client's listing to an unrepresented buyer, does not mean you're working with a buyer according to NARFAQs. So let's say, yeah, you're hosting the open house, buyer walks in. Do you need to get a buyer rep agreement in place with them before you even talk? Absolutely not, because actually you're representing the seller at the time. You're just having a conversation. You're not performing any work for that buyer at the moment. So if the MLS participant is working only as an agent or sub-agent of the seller, then the participant is not working with the buyer. In that scenario, an agreement is not required because the participant is performing work for the seller, not for the buyer. Authorized dual agents, on the other hand, work with the buyer and the seller. So at that point, you would need to have the buyer rep agreement. So they come in, they tour the house. You're working on behalf of the seller. You're allowing them to tour the house. Then they decide they want to maybe proceed with an offer. They're unrepresented. Okay, now you need to get a buyer rep agreement in place with them if they're going to be represented. So that's how that's going to work. Looks like we have a few questions. I'm going to jump on those. Do you know how that BA agreement will be enforced? I don't yet, actually, and I'm sure we're going to find out pretty soon. Maybe they've put it out there, but I haven't seen it yet. But I have not seen how they're going to enforce that. Random audits, we got to turn them in. I don't know yet. If you put a predetermined amount, what happens if you earn less than the printed amount? Well, what could happen is technically you have an agreement with the buyer. You gotta not really think about the seller at that point and what they're paying. What you're doing is creating an agreement, just like a listing agreement is between you and the seller or the broker and the seller. It's the same thing with the buyer rep agreement. You're making a commitment and negotiating compensation for your buyer representation services. So let's say you put 2% in there that the buyer is going to pay you and they're agreeing to pay you for your services. And the seller is paying less than that. Technically, the buyer needs to pay the difference there, or you need to negotiate with the seller to see if they'll contribute extra to make up the difference there. But technically, yes, the buyer owes you that amount of money. And the next question is, what if the buyer wants to represent themselves? They can do that. And maybe you need to make that discretionary decision on if you want to allow that to happen, because there are risks and strategies behind that on letting the buyer represent themselves as well. We're probably going to see that a little bit more often. The problem with the buyer representing themselves that I see most often is the agent, the listing agent, tends to start creating agency by answering questions. What does this paragraph mean? Or how does the contingency timelines work? And different things like that. Like when you start offering advice and coaching them, now you're starting to create agency, and now you're in this predicament and you want to keep an arm's length. If they are going to be unrepresented, yes, you can prepare the offer. They can let you know what the terms are going to be. You can prepare it, send it over to them to sign. You can send them the disclosures to sign that need to be signed, even buyer advisories, which I would definitely add in there. Can you give advice on all of them? No. You probably want to have them contact an attorney or read what it says, because if they're unrepresented, they need to stay unrepresented. Otherwise, you can get into kind of an issue there. Next question, what if the buyer wants to make the commission a part in their offer, asking the seller to pay the commission? That is actually a part of the RPA on page 2 now of the RPA itself, not the package, where it says that the seller agrees to pay the obligation of the buyer broker. You're going to check that box because you have a buyer rep agreement in place. And that's how you're asking for them to pay for your compensation. Is it okay to use buyer broker agreement and an SPVB starting June 20? Yeah, you can use it now. You can. They've been available. Buyer rep agreements have been around for a long time, actually. I think I saw a stat that only about 30% of deals close with them. Obviously, that's going to go way up. But yeah, you can start using them now. I actually recommend you start using them now so that you can get familiar with using these things, because you don't want August 17th to roll around and you have your first client. Now you're kind of fumbling, and maybe other agents have already been perfecting this. So start getting used to this now. I've been saying it for a couple months. Start incorporating it, get used to it, get to know it, because it's happening. Can sellers pay buyers' agents? I do get this question still. NAR said the proposal would allow sellers and their listing agents to continue offering compensation for buyer broker services, but that those offers won't appear in the MLS as they traditionally have. Agents will still be paid by the buyer, the seller, or a combination. So what's the difference? The offer of compensation will not be in MLS as it has been traditionally, so you are no longer guaranteed a commission without a written agreement. So before, if it was expressed in MLS that there is a 2% commission offered, because we are members of the same association, and those laws of the association state that whatever is offered in MLS is binding, but that will no longer be true. So now what will be binding is the agreement we have with the buyer, just the same as the listing agreement is binding with the seller. You will have to negotiate your fees based on your value proposition. I've been talking about this for even before this lawsuit, value propositions, but now on the buyer side, it is more important than ever to take a half a day, and I have a little bit of material in here, and get your value proposition together. What are you going to talk to buyers about, so that they see that it is valuable to work with you as a buyer's agent and to sign this agreement for compensation. Just like with the seller, you will have to demonstrate value and get a signed agreement for them to pay you a fee. So let's touch on MLS a little bit. I do see that we have some questions. I'll get those in just a sec. So no more CBB field in MLS, question mark. Yeah, it's going away. How will we know if the seller is offering a buyer broker compensation? So CRMLS announced last week that they're moving forward with some changes already. So if you want to check it out, I have a link right here. I can provide this document in the group after we post the replay. CRMLS rolled out changes that allow subscribers to include in a listing any concessions a seller is willing to consider, including for broker commissions. The changes will apply to Matrix, Paragon, and Flex MLS, which combined serve an estimated 110,000 users here in California. The update includes concessions in price, monetary contributions a seller can choose to offer towards a buyer's cost in the transaction in the listing. What are concessions? Concessions are monetary contributions from the seller towards a buyer's costs in the transaction, Concessions may include escrow or title fees, lender fees, or loan discount points, property improvements, broker fees, or other recurring or non-recurring closing costs. So they provided some screenshots of where you're going to see these fields now. So if you're listing a property, these are going to be in there, and they call these the CIP fields. So Paragon, this is what it's going to look like, what you can add in. Flex MLS, I mean, they're all pretty similar. I think Paragon is the one that's a little bit different. And then Matrix. I'm going to go ahead and grab some more questions real quick. There's a lot. On the buyer broker agreement, can we put in the buyer broker agreement refer to RPA for commission? No, we don't discuss commissions in the RPA. Agents are not a party to the transaction. They're not a party to the contract. So you can't negotiate commission on there because there's nowhere for the agents to agree or disagree with what you're asking. You notice the RPA, we put our signature in there for the agency portion, but we don't, there's no part in there discussing commissions. That's expressed on other forms. So you don't negotiate it in the RPA itself. Can you change compensation amount for the agreement at a later time? For instance, if the buyer has agreed to pay $2,000 and you find out a listing agent is offering BAC, can you add that the amount to the agreement before escrow opens? It needs to be before the offer is made, actually, is what I am seeing for that question. So it cannot be done afterwards. It needs to be done prior to the offer even being made. And that would be a modification of terms of the buyer rep agreement. So when we take a listing for 6%, do we still pay the buyer agent, or we only list for 3%? Yes and no. So this goes back to answer that question, or any question similar to that. Compensation is always negotiable between the buyer, between the seller. So it always has been. There's no standards. So if you're having that conversation, and I'll focus on the listing side on another webinar, but if you're having that conversation with your homeowner and about compensation, they've heard about the lawsuit, do I need to pay a buyer broker, this and that now? If they say, you know what, I don't want to offer buyer broker compensation, then no, you're only putting your fee for service in there. If it's going to be negotiable, then that's where you're going to be using the seller concessions fields in the MLSs now, where they're saying, hey, we're open to, paying $10,000 or something like that. So you put the amount that's going to be charged. If there's going to be no co-op where the homeowner says, I'm not paying a buyer's agent at all, or I'm not even open to it or anything like that, then you're only putting your fee for service in there. Does that include Paragon for SDAR MLS? No, it does not. SDAR sent out a statement that they are waiting a little longer before they make changes. So that is not that Paragon. We would be talking about like North County Association of Realtors and East County, who both use Paragon. Do you a listing for 2% and a buyer with no agent chimes in that they can only pay 1%? Do I have to disclose to the seller that the buyer is paying less? Not sure I understand that question. The buyer with no agent chimes in that can only pay 1%. I might need to talk to you about that one separately. I don't know that I'm not understanding that question fully. You said RPA page 2. That is correct. That is where you check the box stating that there is a buyer representation agreement in place. And then there's another form that gets added for that. But the RPA has other section. Can we write the seller agrees to pay? No, you're going to check that box stating that they agree to pay the amount in the buyer representation agreement you have in place with the buyer. You're not discussing commission in the RPA. I'm hearing that if seller concession is 3% and agent is getting 2%. Can the seller use that 1% for themselves to cover costs as well? That the seller concession is 3%. So they're offering 3%, and the agent is getting 2%. I'm guessing from the buyer agency or buyer representation agreement. Can the seller use that 1%? I guess that's between them and the listing agent. Technically, the listing agent has an agreement with the homeowner, and if the buyer's agent has negotiated less with their buyer than what the seller was willing to pay, then technically there's extra commission not being used, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So could it benefit the buyer at all? You have to renegotiate that all before the offer is done, and the verdict is still out on that a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of back and forth, attorneys piping into groups and don't do that and things like that. Some are saying this is what I'm going to do. Let's just continue watching to see what best practices are going to come around. But I don't, for sake of time, I don't want to get too deep on some of this because I got some more stuff to cover. Okay, let's move on real quick. So what functions do the CIP fields have? That's concessions in price. They will allow agents to convey the seller's willingness to consider concessions at the listing level, thus making for a clearer communication and cooperation between agents and brokers. So instead of a CBB field, now we're going to have a concessions and price field. What are the new CIP fields? These will be the new fields when creating a listing. They are concessions and price, a text box for numerical input only. This amount must include any potential concessions in a single total amount. Concessions and price type. This is a selection to classify the number above as either dollar or percent. Seller consider concessions. So this is for matrix and flex users. A selection of either yes or no. If yes, then the listing would include an auto-populated phrase, a seller may consider a buyer concession if made in an offer. Seller consider concessions, paragon only. A selection of either yes or no. If yes, the following will appear when hovering your cursor over the help icon. A seller may consider a buyer concession if made an offer. So this all sound, until we start seeing this in action, we're really not going to get a good grip of what this looks like. But this is explaining what it's going to look like. Do I have to include concessions in all my listings? The answer is no, it's all completely optional. It's dependent on what the seller is willing to do here. Are the CIP fields binding? Also no, because this is what the seller is willing to offer on this. Whereas before the CBB field was binding because of our bylaws as being a realtor member. This, or being an MLS subscriber, this is a little different now. So it's it's whatever is in the actual agreement we have. SDMLS users, to answer that question previously, so they're waiting. They sent out a notice that they consulted with industry and legal experts. SDMLS believes it's prudent to err on the side of caution and not make any bold moves before they are required to do so by the settlement. I kind of agree with that, and I actually see a lot of other MLSs doing the same thing, kind of holding out, waiting to see, they're waiting to get a little closer to August before they make any changes to make sure nothing is changing again, because there seems to be some little things that are still kind of coming out here. And they're also waiting for a lot of clarifications, it seems like. So they're going to be leaving the CBB field until August 1st. This is SDMLS. I haven't come across any other info really, other than we're waiting till we get a little closer. If you've heard something different from your MLS, feel free to throw it in the chat. But that's kind of where we're at. So let me check out. Maybe they might lose some members. Will we have a new RPA review so we know exactly what's in it and how to use it? Yeah, we probably will, because I think the 27th of this month, they're going to be releasing new forms again. There are drafts of those forms out. They're available on the CAR website. So if you log into car.org, you have to actually log in, and then you can go to a little search field and type in new forms 2024 is what I would do. And you'll get a list, and at the top of the list, they have a couple selections you can make there, and it has all the new forms that they're rolling out. It's not necessarily new forms either. So there are new forms, but they're also revisions to current forms. So I'm not really going to go over the current RPA because there's going to be some changes coming. So once those are done, we'll do that after the rollout of the next forms edition. So let's touch on incorporating the buyer representation agreement into your business, because this is happening. So why are these new changes so concerning to agents? I mean, I see just a lot of chatter about this. Agents are kind of arguing with each other online, it seems like, about what they're going to do and what's allowed and not allowed. And the problem with that is, yes, nationwide, there's this settlement with NAR, but individual MLSs are handling things a little differently, and state contracts are different as well. So everybody is getting kind of some bad information. I don't want to say bad, but it's inaccurate if you're listening to somebody that isn't doing stuff in your state, that isn't practicing in your state. So use the CAR website for answering questions, because that's the state we're in. So the short answer to why is this so concerning is most agents and most people are just scared of change, and this is a big one. And unfortunately, there's nothing we could do about it. We just need to adapt. The media has been putting a very negative spin towards our industry from this lawsuit. This is causing fear for many agents that buyers will be wiped out, or buyers' agents will be wiped out. I don't necessarily think so. This is just a change. That's all this is. So it's how we deal with it. If you're going to let it affect your business, and if you're not going to adapt, yeah, more than likely you're not going to be working with buyers very often or at all. Truth is that presenting the reasons why a buyer should pay for representation, potentially even out of pocket for services, is out of our comfort zone. We haven't been doing it. We do it as listing agents, but we haven't been doing it as buyer's agents. Most buyer's agents have not actually put together a list detailing the benefits for individual representation. This is one of the major factors of why we lose clients to listing agents, is because we haven't actually shown our value to the buyer of, it's not just showing them houses and writing contracts, there's a lot of other things that we bring to the table as a buyer's agent. And if you don't have that dialed in, your value proposition, you're gonna definitely be losing some buyers. So this is a paradigm reset. It's time to start having different compensation conversations with buyers and sellers. And if you look at the compensation change, the commission changes through the years, you'll see 6% was never really a standard, like the media says it was, or even when clients come to you and say, so now we don't have to pay the standard commission, you might want to call them out right then and correct them, because it never was a standard here. It's always been negotiable. And you can see these swings here in the average commission percentage through the years, starting from 1991 up to 2020. And you'll notice, these lower amounts, the 5.32 and the 5.02, we're talking 2001 to 05. We all know what happened then. If you're in that market, it was crazy. That was a real big boom. And then we hit into recession, and the foreclosure crisis and everything like that, commissions went way up again. Well, I don't know about way up, but they bumped up, looks like about 0.5%. They bumped back up, and then they've kind of gradually been on the decline again. And these are hotter markets again. This was a very stalled out market here, between '06 and, about 16. Um, it was, it was a bad market. So, um, reasons for commission fluctuations over the years, and this is my opinion, but its market shifts have been a major driving factor. So you notice the low points and the graph correlates with years of hot real estate market. Having been through those markets as a salesperson at the time, depending on sales to feed my family, I can attest that it was easier to command a higher commission amount in the bad markets as sellers were desperate to sell. So, I mean, sometimes I would even turn away listings if they were trying to negotiate my commission too far down, and I didn't want to work their overpriced property because I already had a bunch of them. So, I would turn them down even sometimes if someone wasn't going to pay me the amount I wanted to work on that listing and get it sold, then I just wouldn't take the listing back then. And so this is during this era right here where commission went up, because I could command a higher commission during those times. So in the hot markets, there were many times I had to be competitive though with my commission as agents were doing the same to compete for business. So in those hotter markets, yeah, sometimes I'd have to be, reduce my commission amount because there was no way that seller was going to work with me. They had it in their head, no matter how good I was, no matter how many homes I sold, no matter how much experience I had, they only wanted to pay a certain percentage to get that home sold. So either I wouldn't take it or I would take it. But that's when, it was definitely more competitive. This is what we're going to be seeing now, or what I believe we're going to be seeing now, is a lot of competition. So I'm going to liken the next couple of years, because of the massive media coverage we've had. This is fueling the fire here. So even if the market is not as hot as it was a few years back when the rates were 2.5%, we still have a fire under here fueling competition. So, and we need to be sensitive to that and make adjustments and adapt our business plans accordingly here. So we need to up our buyer representation game. The days of lazy buyers agents, gone. Those who will adapt to this are going to thrive. If you're expecting full service compensation for representing a buyer, then you need to stop bad habits like sending your buyers to open houses because you're too busy or it's too far, telling your clients to look online for homes and get back to you with the ones they like, not showing up for inspections, leaving your client in the dark during escrow because you got this, you're like, oh, don't worry. We need to be checking in with them regularly and letting them know how things are going, educating them, advising them. Sending documents for e-signature without explaining the documents you're asking them to sign. We need to stop all of those bad habits and take a step back and, get the commission breath off of us and represent the clients, be professional and go through these points with them. They're expecting us to be fully representing them and educating and advising them through the transaction. So if you want to earn full service compensation, you need to show your value and prove it that you are worth it. So something to think about, we all kind of these days reference pre-COVID and post-COVID, I mean, that was a huge paradigm shift in the world, right? Like things were one way up until then, and now they're this way, So there was like, back before COVID, we refer, and I think we're going to be doing the same thing here with this pre and post NAR settlement. I mean, this is the paradigm shift we're coming into right now. So you want to keep in mind that there are thousands of people obtaining their real estate license every year here in California. These new licensees will be entering the business where buyer representation agreements are norm for them. They don't know any different, especially if they've never bought a house. they're going to be better at explaining the importance of the representation and securing buyers than many more seasoned agents, because they don't know any other way of conducting business. So all of us in the business today, we're the ones having to adapt. The new licensees coming into the business later this year, they will have known nothing different. This is how they're going to be doing business from the beginning. So they're probably going to be a lot quicker to learn how to do this. It's similar to, kids being better with tech gadgets than their parents, like we didn't grow up with, at least I didn't grow up with a lot of tech no tech as a kid. Everything was analog back then. But then come high school, or actually more like, late elementary school, computers got introduced and things like that. So I'm like one of those cups people who, during my childhood and through high school, I did have tech come in, but like my kids, they're way better at it even than I am, or even better at it than some of my friends' parents, because they didn't grow up with it at all. So this is going to be the same kind of thing. We're having to adapt. Some of our major competition isn't even licensed yet. They're in the process of getting their license, and they're going to come in and they're going to kill it with these buyer representation agreements and presentations, because they will know no other way. So a couple items to cover in the buyer representation agreement. I took this from a coach, Jim Reamley. So you want to touch on the search process. You want to touch on leaving no stone unturned. Where are you going to help them find houses? How are you going to help them find houses? The research process, the buyer CMA, the current market analysis. These are out here already and they're easy to produce. Negotiation process, paperwork that's going to be involved, financing the purchase. This is probably where you can incorporate the pre-approval. Timelines and contingencies. If you don't know how those work, or you're vague on it, I've done many classes and trainings on that, but get to know that really well. That is a big question that comes up quite often with buyers. Inspections and due diligence, also a hot topic. Inclusions and exclusions, things they're asking for and excluding in the contract. Buyer agency and buyer rep agreements, and then aftercare. How are you going to take care of them after the sale? You're going to want to ask yourself these questions when you're designing your buyer presentation. What's proprietary about your approach to each of these areas? What do you do differently that others aren't doing, other buyers agents aren't doing? And the truth is we're all kind of doing similar things, but what you state in your presentation to your prospective client is what they're going to hear. So will they hear that from you and the next agent and the next agent as well? It might be kind of similar, but you still have to say something. You want to ask yourself, am I answering the question of how I work with my clients? Because that's a question they're going to have. Are we going to be compatible? Do you work like how I want to work with an agent? Am I explaining my process in working with buyers clearly? And am I able to provide a quick and concise overview of the buying process in our market? And this fluctuates, our northern team is probably going to have a different conversation from our central team, and our central team is going to have a different conversation from our southern team, because the process is different up and down the state. So you want to get that together. A good buyer representation agreement trains buyers how to buy. So here's a little graph. We're getting kind of close to 10 here, but you see that the biggest thing a buyer wants is help to find the right home to purchase, which you can see is basically, these top three things here that you're answering the question for. This is accounting for about half of the matrix here. So first time buyers 46%, repeat buyers 51%, new homes 62%. How are you going to find them? The right new home community to go in. Do you even know about new home communities? Are you researching them? Have you incorporated them into your business model at all, because I could tell you some of our agents have, and they sell a lot of them. And then previously owned homes. So I thought this was a pretty good little graph, because you can look at this and say, okay, what should I focus on most in my buyer representation presentation? Obviously you want to touch on pretty heavily how you're going to help them get into the right community, into the right home. You're going to listen to their needs. Sometimes, they give you a needs list that's, 2 pages long. I like to flip the script on it sometimes to say, what don't you want in a house? What don't you want in a community? Because it's much easier for me to narrow down something based on that versus all of the stuff they do want. Because sometimes you'll find that they'll end up buying a home with some of that stuff, or without some of that stuff that, it was a must. They had to have white cabinets and they end up buying a home with gray cabinets. So I wouldn't focus on that too much sometimes. Sometimes you want to focus on the stuff that is just a clear deal breaker, and that'll help you narrow down the search. Just about done here. So securing a buyer representation agreement. Here's just some suggestions. A best practice to consider is to not treat the buyer representation agreement like a listing agreement. When we go for the listing agreement, we're like, okay, we're spending money, on marketing, on Facebook ads, on photos, on drone shots, out of pocket money. And so we want to secure a lengthy term for this listing. The buyer representation agreement, we are going to be spending gas money and other things like that. Yes, but not only is this going to be somewhat new to the public, it's going to be hard if you don't have a very strong value proposition. And this is, a Facebook lead, a Google leads, a cold lead or something that you're now working with, to get them to sign a 6-month exclusive agreement with you can be a challenge. And you might lose a buyer that would be willing to work with you that length of time, but you're asking for a lot of commitment up front. So going for the jugular right up front, I don't really recommend that unless you are really good with these. So best practice, get them comfortable with a short-term agreement, exclusive or non-exclusive. There's 2 options in the buyer rep agreement. And do this for your first showings. You're going to take them out this weekend. Maybe we're going to just do an agreement for the next 5 days for anything that you're going to buy in this county, and that would be a non-exclusive, meaning, yeah, they can work with other agents. I mean, you can do an exclusive as well. Either way, it's going to pertain to the homes you do show, because you are, as NAR has expressed, working with the buyer at that point. So, and there's a way to protect your commissions with that as well. So maybe you do show them 5 homes this weekend and they say, you know what, we don't want to really work with you now after that. And then they have wanting to write an offer with another agent on that home. There's a form that you're going to want to use in that instance. And I have that just down here a little bit. So you can also make the agreement specific for properties only. So if you're going to go show, maybe they have a very short list of properties, maybe they've been chasing down a property, maybe you want to just make an exclusive for those property addresses only, because you're sure they're going to get into one of those. You could do it that way too. And maybe that is a little less commitment in their mind. This form right here, NBIP, that's what you're going to want to use if you or the buyer cancels the BRBC or the term expires. So if you show the homes this weekend and they say, you know what, we're going to go work with this other agent now, you're going to want to send them this this notice right here and attach the addresses. So take a look at this form. I'm not going to pull it up today because we're short on time. But you provide this form stating, hey, we were working together on these properties and I am due a commission based on the buyer representation agreement we have in place. So that is how you secure your commission on properties you've shown while you've had the agreement in place, even if you are no longer working with that buyer. It works similar to the listing agreement. If you have ever seen the first page of the listing agreement, the paragraph underneath where you put in the total commission, and it says after X amount of days, I usually put 30 days there. It works very similar to that paragraph. Pretty short on time. We still have a lot of people on the webinar. Are there any pertinent questions that I can answer? Do we just give the listing agent a copy of the BRBC? You're going to attach the form SPBB after you check that box in the RPA. How will buyer agreements be enforced? I don't know that yet. It's enforced through the MLS. I'm not sure yet how they're going to be doing that. I haven't looked into it, or they haven't talked about it. I'm not sure. They're just saying that they're the ones that are going to be enforcing these. I'll attach this. I did some snippets of the BRBC here. A couple key points. I mean, if you want to stay on for a few minutes. Questions and conversations about the lawsuit commissions are already abundant. So we just want to be real clear with these, and we don't, be confident when you're getting this signed, just like you are when you go to take a listing, you're negotiating your compensation, you're showing your value proposition, and be clear on how it's going to be paid. That you don't want to say your services are free because the sellers are going to pay me, because the sellers still can pay you, but that has never really been something you should say anyways. Because your services are free, the seller has actually been paying and can continue depending on how everything shakes out with that particular property. So here is where you'll put it. I recommend putting a higher amount in here, because if you put, like I said, if you put 1% here, just because you're trying to get this thing signed, and the seller ends up saying, hey, I'm paying 2% on this one. Well, guess what? You're getting 1%. So, because you can't get paid more than what you've agreed. So, I don't really like that rule, but it is what it is. Explain agency, because this is important, and you need to know what agency is too, in case there is a non-represented buyer and you are on the listing side and they are going to remain unrepresented buyer. Be sure you know what agency means, and so you don't get caught in expressed agency. Explain your services and obligations, especially when implementing buyer representation agreement. Section 6 does a really good job. I mean, it's basically telling them right here what it means to be working with us and what we're going to be doing. So broker authorizations and obligations, this is what we're obligated to do. So I think that this is a great thing to stop and explain and talk about and discuss when you're trying to get this signed with your client, because this is going to help, I think, get this signed for you. It tells right here what you do. Explain to the buyers that what their obligations are as well. This can help set expectations and also help mitigate post-closing claims from the buyer regarding negligence and misrepresentation. I had this come up this weekend with a buyer who had a lot of misconceptions about what I was supposed to be doing as an agent. I was supposed to be explaining the CC&R package to her, and I was supposed to be, explaining everything about the home inspection as far as what she should and should not have done. And that gets you into a problem. I'm not a home inspector. I'm not a general contractor. I can't tell you what is more important to get done than the other. And same thing with the CC&Rs. I'm not going to sit there and try and decipher these CC&Rs. If you look at the RPA, it is buyer to satisfy. It is their job to satisfy themselves as to the condition of the home in all aspects. So you know, if they're asking me about zoning and things like that, no, I am not going to go find that information. I will tell you where to go find that information, but I am not going to go to the zoning department and ask them questions about this house and then go and regurgitate these answers to the buyer, because I might miss something, you know, or I might explain it incorrectly. And now I'm on the hook. So it is their job to do that stuff, and we need to be very clear with them on what their obligations are in this transaction. And that is one of the major ones. So, and that is right here in section 7 of the BRBC. So section 6, here's my obligations. Section 7, hey buyer, this is what you're obligated to do. So I think that these two things are really important to touch on in your buyer presentation of these, and when you're going through it, so you can really set these expectations well. And truthfully, I think your transactions are going to start going a lot better if you have bumpy transactions quite often, and you start explaining things like this up front and slowing down a little bit, and don't let the excitement of the deal get in the way of your representation of them, and just take a breather, explain these things to them. I think everybody's transactions are going to go much smoother, actually. So I actually think this is a good thing that's happening in the industry. It's scary, it's a change. There's a lot of uncertainty, but this is our chance to step up as professionals to show our worth as buyers agents. See then. One last question. Can we email this out to us? Yeah, I could probably email it too. I'll have Roxanne email this out. And then, like I said, I am going to post it in our Rise Realty Facebook group. The recording will be in there. And then I'll also provide a copy of this document in case you want to reference it. Sometimes it's easier to just reference a document instead of listening to me talk for an hour and 7 minutes. So hopefully, you know, I'm not answering every single question here today with this. This is a very big topic. There's probably going to be multiple sessions of this. There's going to be, you know, changes coming out, new forms coming out later this month. We're going to be going over all of that. Some of the stuff we don't have answers to yet because we're not there yet. August 27th isn't here. So I think after August 1st, though, we're really going to start seeing some movement on this. So let's just all keep informed, share information in the group if you want. As you come across it, I'm trying to share it too. Attend free webinars out there. CAR's having them, your board is having them. There's so many webinars going on about best practices and the agreement itself and presentations and putting them together and stuff like that. Go attend that stuff. Do at least one so you can get some, you know, the brain juices going and get a good presentation put together, because you're gonna need it moving forward. And this is just where we're at in this industry. And like, don't look at it negatively. This is where we are going to start separating ourselves and standing out against some of the competition. And when, you know, agents are saying, oh, there's going to be a mass exodus of buyers agents, quite possibly yes. And they are the ones that are not going to be preparing buyer presentations. They are not going to be showing their value. And unfortunately, you know, it's going to happen. Don't let that be you. Get your value proposition put together, write it down, practice it, rehearse it. And I think everybody's going to be just fine. This is just a change. And we'll just keep everybody informed as we go. So hopefully everybody has a great week. You can always reach out, schedule time with me. Link is in the back office. That is also in my email address if you want to schedule time. We can jump on a Zoom, we can get on a call, whatever. You can also just call me. So hope you have a great week, and we will talk to you guys. We'll talk to you soon.